Hey, it's Neville here. And if you've been following Copywriting course for a while, you know that I love making images and putting them into my content. So we actually asked a pro, Jack Butcher from Visualize Value, to come have a draw off with us. So we selected a random prompt and we all tried to draw it. And we weren't sharing our screens with each other, so we don't really see what each other are doing. And here are the results. It's actually crazy how different each one came out. Watch how we did it. So we picked out a phrase to draw. And the phrase was, by being deliberate, you can compound your daily habits so you build a skill. That's all we had to go from. So we each started drawing that out in our own interpretation. And it's really interesting to see how different it was. Here's what happened. Jack Butcher uses Apple Keynote to actually design a lot of his slides, where he has a lot of the colors, lines, text already pre-formatted. So he interpreted this as a single image where he has decision, habit, skill, and he actually made a couple different versions of this same prompt. So the prompt was, by being deliberate, you can compound your daily habits so you build a skill. So he made version 1, version 2, and version 3. I took a far more literal interpretation of this prompt, and I thought the by being deliberate part would mean a guy is entering into some sort of competition. For some reason, I went with archery. I don't know why. And then the you can compound your daily habits was drawing these arrows, getting better and better each day. And then so you can build a skill, he wins first place. So that's just the way I personally interpreted it under the time crunch. So this actually kind of turned out like I thought. Like, this belongs in a museum or on a poster in some sort of Guggenheim type building. Like, you just got your own little style going on here. And then I go way on the wacky end for some reason. Can you maybe just like briefly explain what you mean by these?
Yeah, so the first one is really just trying to separate it into these, like isolate the three stages of it. So you have the decision to build a skill, then you have the habit that has to sit between your decision and the final state, which is the skill. And then on the right-hand side, you have the skill built. And the second one is really like trying to get a bit more real contextually. So the idea of drawing a circle being the process here, and as time passes and you practice, your rendering of a circle gets more and more perfect up in the top right hand of the corner, and trying to bring the compound curve in as well. And then the final one's a fitness metaphor. It may be a little out there, but it's the weight stack, right? You have all of the weight there the first time you try. Maybe you lift the first plate. After a little while, you can lift half of the plate, and finally you can lift the whole stack.
I'm just showing a Visualize Value, the Instagram. You have 160K followers or so, and you post these black kind of images. How did your style start? What happened there? Why are they in this format all the time?
The process itself began as like visuals for pitch decks. So my background is a designer at ad agencies, so I always get like the grunt job of making the pitch deck to sell the work. So there was all these like abstract diagrams in there that's, where your product sits within a market. Here's a 2x2 that explains this or that. And that was sort of something I just spent an inordinate amount of time doing as a employee. And then as I started an agency a few years ago and wanted to essentially attract clients for that service. So how do I get people to pay me to visualize their value proposition? So the style decision really just came as a product of like, okay, I'm not going to waste any time figuring out colors and fonts and backgrounds, and I'm just going to pick a couple of constraints, and then all of the kind of creative onus is on me to, work within those constraints to convey the idea. So it's a happy accident in some sense, but then you have this like compounding equity when people start recognizing the work, right? If you just stick to something, it's like, oh, I know where that came from. I've seen that before, as opposed to me switching up the style every time and not really like building a reputation. But again, hindsight, like anecdotal observations that just seem to work nicely. Yeah.
How do you even approach this? So if you were prompted with all these different things and you wanted to create something, what are you thinking? Are you thinking like, oh, I know how to make that in my head right away? Or do you spend a lot of time thinking about it? Like, what's the process?
Yeah, I think like you can kind of scan a list and look for like the visual components of an idea almost. So the way I think about it is like if I look at that list there are a few in there that have like a sequence. to them. The one that jumps out at me is the AIDA. Like how do you visually represent like these contrasting ideas? And if there's a sequence, it gets easier to do that. And I think it's also like it adds more context to the idea. Sometimes, you can draw things for the sake of drawing things. They might not necessarily add context to the statement or the concept that you're trying to convey. So look for things like contrast, like a before and after, or a sequence, or some like time-based transformation that's happening, or like two values that you can plot against one another. So there's like, it's not an exact science, obviously, but you look at things that are that have a visual component to them, and then reverse engineer it. And more often than not, there's like just the muscle of doing this a ton of times. You'll have a visual device, a shape, a graph, something that kind of loosely relates to it, and then try and put it on paper and iterate a few times and get to something that is not redundant. So it's like, how does this actually add a bit more context to the words as opposed to just being representative of what the words say? So there has to be some, I think, there has to be some nuance in the idea. There has to be some like valuable thing in there that benefits from being visualized, as opposed to just a caption for an image that doesn't provide more context.
So to recap this fun little challenge, Jack used Apple Keynote to create all his images. Dan used an iPad plus the Adobe Procreate app. And I personally used an iPad, Tatsuya Sketches, and Google Presentations, as well as a little bit of Photoshop to make these images. So we had to draw out the phrase, by being deliberate, you can compound your daily habits so you build a skill. And here were the results. Jack Butcher came up with these 3 amazing images with decision, habit, skill. He made a second version with these circles, and then he made a third version with these weights. Dan went more of a chart and literal route, where you go from not fit to fit and this random chart. And then compounding daily habits was showing that you compound. And then building a skill was going from deliberate and random like that. So it was a more literal interpretation. My interpretation was a little bit more cartoony and literal, where a guy joins an archery competition. Then he gets better. By day 1, he's not so good. By day 15, he's better. And by day 30, he's perfect. And then he builds a skill. And of course, with the time crunch, we didn't have that much time to make these super, super polished. I would have liked to put a wreath and such. But ultimately, it's really cool to see how different people interpret drawings in a different way and how many different ways there are to do it. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. My name is Neville from the Copywriting course, and I will talk to you later.